So with Avengers Doomsday coming out, this is one of the biggest movies of all time, if not the biggest movie of all time that we are seeing being handled. And with that, we obviously know that Robert Downey Jr. is playing Doctor Doom, who is one of the biggest, baddest villains to ever grace a comic book and a TV screen, and now the biggest villain to ever grace, a movie screen. But with that happening, we all know that the greatest, superhero actor of all time, Robert Downey Jr., has been casted as Doctor Doom. And so I want to talk about a few things, but welcome to the Loreverse. But today we're going to talk about RDJ and Doctor Doom and why he is not a Tony Stark variant. Now, I've done a lot of videos on this, but I never really put one on this channel. So I wanted to talk about it and explain the logic behind why, RDJ Doctor Doom is not a Tony Stark variant. So first off, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the main thing is that when he was first announced, they announced him as Victor Von Doom. And the reason why that is very important, and the reason why they would never, because I think making him a Tony Stark variant is really stooping below. And the reason why they would never do that, in my opinion, is because I believe that Doctor Doom is such a big character that you would never make him a Tony Stark variant and make him lose his importance as a character. And I can understand why people would say, oh, he could be tied to Tony Stark. I don't think they're going to do that whatsoever. I do think Tony Stark will pop up in Avengers Doomsday, but he could possibly be tied to Doctor Doom in some way. But I don't think the tie is going to be that they are both variants of each other, or that the Tony Stark in our MCU was a Victor Von Doom raised by the Starks. I think that takes away from the Infinity Saga #1, which Feige promised that they weren't going to take away from. And I think it also would take away from just Doctor Doom as a character, linking him to Tony Stark. To me, that just doesn't make sense at all to do that link. And I really think that would be stupid. Now, this also doesn't match up with how variants work in the MCU. Now, I want to break down how variants work. Okay, so the way that the multiverse works in Marvel is that you can look like someone, okay, on another Earth. But just because you look like them, that doesn't mean that you are the same as that character. Here's the perfect example. If you remember when we watched Deadpool and Wolverine, right? When they were in the void, they saw Chris Evans. And who did Deadpool think he was at first? Deadpool thought he was Captain America. But if you guys remember, bro was not Captain America. He was actually the Human Torch from the Fox universe. When we used to watch X-Men or watch the Fantastic Four back in like 2005, Chris Evans was the Human Torch. It wasn't Captain America, it was the Human Torch. When we go to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, right? We saw a John Krasinski Reed Richards, but who is the Reed on Earth 828? Pedro Pascal. Who is the Reed in the Fox universe? Ian Gruffin, right? Three different people, right? But they are the same person. And so here's what we need to understand. Variants aren't based off of what you look like, but variance is based off of your true identity and your bloodline and where you come from, and who you are. Like Pedro Pascal is Reed, John Krasinski is Reed, and Ian Gruffin is Reed on their respective Earths, which means that in our MCU timeline, there could be a Joe Schmo that just looks like Pedro Pascal, but he's not Reed. He could be just Joe from ShopRite. You know what I mean? And that's the way that this thing works. So if that's the case, then it makes sense that in our MCU timeline, RDJ is Iron Man, but in Earth 828, which is the Fantastic Four's timeline, RDJ is Doctor Doom. It makes sense. It makes complete sense. We've seen the same with Chris Evans, and we have seen the same with Reed Richards and Sue Storm and all of the other characters, that we see. And we are going to see the same thing with the X-Men too. Yes, we are getting the X-Men coming back. We also are getting a new X-Men team, right? And that new X-Men team, they will be variants of the X-Men team that we grew up with. Because there's no definite, team right now, because there's the multiverse and there's multiple versions of teams, and we're going to see that. So that's how variants work. And because of that very thing, that is why Doctor Doom is not a Tony Stark variant. That is why Tony Stark in the MCU is Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom is Victor Von Doom. They chose RDJ, I believe, because he was, in their eyes, the best guy to portray a Doctor Doom. Okay. That is why. Now, if we want to get into some of the similarities that Tony Stark and Doctor Doom have, we could get into that, but I don't think that. But even though they are similar, that doesn't mean that they're connected, as in they are complete variants of each other. You know what I mean? So yeah, we have to stop the variant talk. We have to stop the Doctor Doom is Tony Stark talk, or Tony Stark is Doctor Doom talk, because That, because I'm telling you, that would kill the Infinity Saga. And honestly, I wouldn't be against killing like I wouldn't be against going back on stuff. I really would not be. But Feige promised that, they weren't going to go back on it. But I do think they're going to use stuff from the Infinity Saga to boost the story. But I don't think they're using Tony Stark's death to boost the story. They're using Steve going back in time to boost the story. I think Tony Stark's death is something that is going to be unchanged. I can see Tony Stark from, that movie coming back to fight maybe, but he still, I believe, is going to go back to his timeline to die and save the world from Thanos. So yeah, Steve is the one who has the more of the connection to Doctor Doom right now than Tony Stark. And I think that, that was a trail that we all ran on for a while. I ran on the trail for a second too, but I think, the real connection isn't Tony Stark and Doctor Doom, but it's Steve Rogers and Doctor Doom. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, y'all, and peace out.